And there we go. Hello, welcome to Friday night. Bienvenidos, welcome in, bienvenue. Just so you know, you have three indie authors that write fantasy sci-fi lined up for you tonight, and you are going to get to meet all three of them and find out what makes them tick and see what makes them right and figure out what makes them similar to you, because that's the real question: is what's in it for you? And the real answer is at the end of tonight, after meeting all three of these authors, you are going to pick which one of them you're going to take home and snuggle up with tonight. The books. So just as a quick introduction, I wanted to go around the horn, and Tori, we'll start with you. Can you, in one sentence, can you sum up what's in your book? What's in it for me?
Motley Crew, werewolves, mental health themes, all kind of wrapped up in a dark YA fantasy with a big heart.
Ooh, very nice. Nikky, what do you got?
Gosh, I now have to follow up on that. I think so. I guess it's not enemies to lovers, but enemies to friends. So girl fights monster, girl accidentally ends up in blood pact with monster, which is forbidden. So if you love monsters, really good world building, lots of magic systems. What else is there? There's a bit of Miyazaki elements in it. I'll leave it at that.
Ooh, that sounds lovely. And Michael, what about you?
Well, first of all, I feel a little naked without one of these cool little underscored white boxes that say like the Beanie Queen or Coffee Addict. How do I get one of those? I'll start with the title. I can at least get that right. The Price of Power is the name of the first book in the series. It's kind of like Game of Thrones meets X-Men, or some X-Men sprinkled into a Game of Thrones world. Very gritty and violent and a little spiritual. Yeah, that should do.
I think there's a lot that's intriguing there. Okay, everybody, we're going to have two of our Bachelor and Bachelorettes hide behind the curtain while we interview Bachelorette number one. Thank you all so much. We'll be right back with you. Hey, Tori.
Hey, Andy.
Welcome to Friday night. Thank you so much. Would you mind if I read your bio?
Please.
So, when she was a little sprout, her epic fantasy storytelling involved small pirate and animal figurines that would brutally invade peaceful Lego villages. Inspired early on by the powerful storytelling of writers like Jack London, Brian Jacques, and Francine Rivers, she was obsessed with characters she couldn't get out of her head and the possibility of worlds undiscovered. After writing a few books, becoming a self-published author starting at age 14, and teaching young writers conferences for a few years, she went to college, married the weirdest boy she'd ever met. They now have three small humans of their own who are just as weird as they are, but much more wonderful. Today, she's a wife and a stay-at-home mom, but she's still a storyteller. She writes today and beneath the supervision of two feline overlords and a chair that is older than she is. But she wouldn't have it any other way. Pull up a chair, join the cast. She hopes you find her world a magical place you can't wait to go back to. Tori, where does all of this start?
Well, I was born. So kind of going back to the beginning of my bio, when I was a kid, I was an only child. And so I got very good at entertaining myself. We lived in a big house and I had a lot of space and I had a lot of massive cities of Legos and Duplos and figurines and all of the things. And there'd be this kingdom over here and this kingdom over here. And they'd have these massive generational battle war things. And that was like me being an epic fantasy writer, very small.
I can't type, but I can make these stories happen.
Yep. Yeah, hours and hours of it.
When you were and that's when you're a little kid, when you're like 11, 12, 13, are you like the biggest brain in school? Are you, the loner kid smoking cigarettes out by the bathroom?
Yeah, basically. No, just kidding. So yeah, I was homeschooled. And so I actually had a hard time in the beginning learning how to read. And I really didn't take off till I was 9 or 10. And after that, I used to bring massive like paper grocery bags home full of library books, and I'd read them all in 2 weeks and go back for more. And I couldn't get enough of it. And I started noticing that there were certain books I'd get to the end and be like, well, that was a dumb ending. Why didn't they do it this way? You know, I was that kid.
Yeah.
I was a nerd. I was such a nerd. I was basically, if you can imagine, Pippi Longstocking, but like the live action version, that was basically me. Like,
So I'm curious, have you ever done any motivational speaking?
I have quite a bit, actually. Yeah.
How did that come about?
So I wrote a book when I was 12 because I was reading all the horse books at the library and I was wanting to write my own. And so I did. And my mom thought it would be a really fun homeschool project for me to, like, let's just print some copies. We can give it to friends and family. It'll be great fun. And so we did that. And all of a sudden, a couple months later, we were getting a whole bunch of people contacting us we didn't know saying, hey, where do we get a copy of this book? And I want to get a copy for my friend or my daughter or whatever. And the nutshell version of that is it blew up really quickly. And
You're 12.
I was
12.
14 when we
14.
published the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, 12 when I wrote it, 14 when we published it. And between the ages of 14 and 19, or 18 when I went to college, I published 7 books. And I traveled all over the United States. We talked at homeschool conferences. My mom and I did presentations on how to get kids excited about reading and writing. I taught young writers conferences here in Minnesota for several years. And I taught one adult writers conference when I was 16. And I actually got to meet Gary Paulson. He was one of the other speakers, which was really, really cool. So yeah, it was a crazy, wild high school career.
So this kind of puts you in the category of child prodigy here, right?
Kind of. And it's weird to like look back on it now because it was such a crazy time for me in my personal life because I was in high school and I'm growing up and I'm trying to figure out where on earth I fit in the world. And then I also have this like fairly successful entrepreneur business going on at the same time. So it was pretty wild.
Learning to juggle a lot of balls up front and being
Sure.
able to manage your own affairs.
Yes. Yeah.
I like the independence. It's kind of a theme. There was something else that what was it? Oh, yes. Tori, have you ever spent any time as a wool merchant?
Oh, yes. You've been doing your research. He is prepared. Yeah. So since the age of 14, I've owned, I think, 4 or 5 small businesses. I was a fiber artist. I still am, but I was a professional fiber artist for a while. And I was kind of the go-between between farmers who had sheep and alpacas and other things that create fiber and I was kind of a broker between the farms and the artists who were looking for specific types of wools and all that kind of stuff. And I also I dyed fiber. I do hand spinning and all that kind of stuff too.
Ridiculous series of talents to just kind of spring up all together.
You know, it's funny though, because I'm the type of person where I can't sit still. And so I have one life and I want to try as many things as I possibly can because, you know, if I see something that looks like fun, that's a hobby, I want to try it because it's exciting and I want to learn because then I have a little bit of an insight into that world and you know, it just continually feeds that creative fire for me as a writer, which is obviously my main passion.
So among these things that you pursued, we're counting doula as one of them?
Yes. I'm also a doula. Yes. Yeah, it's mostly through word of mouth. But yeah, I've attended 8 births besides my own. And I count those. I was an active participant. Yes. Yeah. And it's an incredible it's the most rewarding job ever, honestly. It's a wonderfully beautiful spiritual experience to be there and to get to see new life come into the world and help the moms and the dads.
Dads need all the help they can get.
They do. To be honest, I've had some really great, awesome, supportive dads in the burst that I've been at. So shout out to the dads.
That's good to hear. It's usually the opposite, but it's nice to know that
there are some really great supportive dads out there.
So when you started writing fantasy, what were the authors that you were pulling from or that were influencing you at the time, or was there a progression?
Kind of. It's funny because a lot of the authors that initially inspired my fantasy or just writing in general are very character. That's where I really found my love of deep characters. Jack London is an author I have to point to because White Fang was probably one of the most influential books of my entire childhood. Just as far as the depth of the characterization in that book, and it's just an emotional ride from start to finish. As I got into college and really started finding my footing in fantasy, I picked up Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. That was one of the first fantasy books I read. And then I jumped into Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson fairly soon after that. Nothing like, go big or go home, right?
Right.
So I had no idea what was going on. I was like 21 and trying to read Gardens of the Moon. And I had no idea what was going on. I still mostly don't, but the characters were just so great. They were so good. And then I got to Dead House Gates, and Dead House Gates, book 2 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, is still to this day probably one of the most, if not the most influential fantasy book on me as a writer that I've ever read. So
was it the characters in that one, or was it the prose? Was it the characters? Okay.
The characters, and just the way that Erikson writes human experience and the depth of character and the way that different people cope with things in life. And I mean, it was just all such an incredible exploration of that. And that's something that I really try to lean into in my storytelling too, is really getting into the characters and the experiences that they have.
So you're kind of absorbing all these influences and then you decide to start writing.
Yeah.
So are there people that are influencing you while you're writing Phased, or did you have it all kind of set in your head and the tone that you wanted, years before you ever started?
Phased, actually, this is a story I've told before, I think somewhere, but Phased started as kind of the original idea was, I want to write a werewolf book because I'm sick and tired of Twilight being the only thing that anybody thinks of when we talk about vampires and werewolves and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to write my version of a dark YA book about supernatural teenagers, and I wanted it to be darker, grittier. I wanted to take out all of the gross, toxic romance, and I wanted to put in this kind of visceral action. Like, what would this actually look like if we had werewolves in our human society? There'd be an organization who was trying to regulate that, right? So that was like one of the initial, okay, what does that look like? How do they integrate into human society, and who oversees that, and what's the obvious conflicts here, and all of that kind of stuff. So that was like it started as I want to write a werewolf book, and then it very quickly kind of expanded from there.
Okay, so why did you want to write a werewolf book? Was werewolf a general idea that you were drawn to beforehand? Was it another one of those, I got to the end of the book and I didn't like it, so I want a werewolf book that works? What?
A little bit, yeah. I think one of the films, as far as supernatural films, that I was very influential to me was the Underworld franchise, because to me that's vampires and werewolves, and it's a very dark, gothic kind of visceral story, and I really loved that idea that you could use something like a werewolf condition to explore different themes in mental health. And I started writing Phased about the same time I started trauma therapy in 2019. So these two things kind of converged at the same time, and I ended up writing a story about this very heavy on the themes of mental health and what, you know, how different people can go through the same experiences or traumas and cope completely differently, and how does society treat them, and all. I mean, it was a whole exploration for me through that process.
Okay, so I'm going to skip to one of my later questions now, which
Yeah.
is, so we've all got the hole in the soul, right? And
Yeah.
we're looking to stories to help fill that hole. What is the hole? Because you're genuinely trying to hold up a mirror to the human condition here. What's the hole you're trying to fill?
I think for me, Phased was a love letter to the people who have experienced really dark, hard things in their lives and kept fighting and tried to overcome it anyways. That hope of that there's still ways that we can fight and overcome, no matter what you've been through or no matter what kind of things you're trying to struggle through in your life.
That's a big bar for your first book.
I mean, I definitely, like, all of my previous books, which I wrote when I was very young, so they are appropriately amateurish, but they were such important steps to getting me to exploring the sociology of people and how we react to things. And it was me kind of setting myself up for these deeper, more nuanced, character-driven stories now.
I just get personally, I got to ask you this question. Are you happy, content, satisfied with how you've addressed that in the book?
Very much so. Yeah, I'm honestly very proud of Phased, and it was definitely a project that was very personal, but I really hope that, you know, it's also hitting chords for the readers as well and giving them some of that. Yeah, but we can fight back and we can overcome. So
superlative. So this is a little bit of a tricky question, and I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Go for it.
It's tricky. So if I like X,
sure,
I'll like Phased. Is there anything that fits into that round hole?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who enjoys dark fantasy, because I think a lot of what drives dark fantasy is, you know, that exploration into the human psyche. There's a lot of that typically in dark fantasy. I would say if you are a fan of things like Red Rising, is another one of my personal favorites, and it has that, it's an adult fantasy, but it has that same kind of like introspective, somebody really trying to come to terms with what they've experienced and kind of there's a little bit of revolution flavor in my book, not quite as much as Red Rising, but yeah, I would say those for sure. And if you like YA supernatural, but you're tired of the fact that it's all toxic romance and this really fluffy, like, let's throw some, you know, vampires in there, I think this will be a good book for you.
So the people that like your work, I mean, you've seen the reviews, you've gotten your responses. The people that like it, what's the common thread that you hear from them?
People seem to really love the friendships and the found family aspect of Phased a lot. Andrew Meredith actually had a great quote about how people have always kind of asked for the Hogwarts Marauders novel, and that this definitely has that kind of flavor to it, which didn't even occur to me until he said it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love that. so that was one that really was a cool review. I think I've been really loving how much of an emotional impact it's been having on the people that have been reading it, because that seems to also be a very common thread, and it was what I was going for. So I appreciate that that's landing.
And while we're at it, I believe that oh gosh, I hope I get this right, but I think I'm right. I believe we need to give a shout out to your cover designer.
Yes, my best friend Sarah Ferrari, Sparrow Springs Art. She did my cover for Phased, and she absolutely nailed it. I love it. I love this cover so much. The character on the cover is Val. She's one of the two sisters who are main characters.
And then the final thing is I got 1 minute left, so I have to ask. For those of you who don't know, Tori has a very successful booktube channel, and she's got the beanie. She always wears the beanie. Is the beanie just I Love Red Rising, or did the beanie come from somewhere else?
The beanie was I Love Red Rising, and then I wore it a couple of times in videos, and now if I take it off, people yell at me. So it kind of accidentally became sort of the brand of my channel, and I just was like, hey, I love beanies, and then I was the beanie queen, and it stuck. So
well, everybody be sure to subscribe to Tori's channel, and if this sounds good to you, something that's emotional and werewolf driven that really drives home the point of you can get past this, please go out now and pick up Phased right there. It turns out that you can buy it on Amazon, and you can get it right this very minute while we're sitting here. So go do that right now. All right, Tori, thank you very, very much. I appreciate you. Have fun tonight, and thanks for getting dressed up. Nikky Lee, bienvenidos. How you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
10 o'clock in the morning for you?
Yeah, just flicked over to 11. So we're heading towards lunch, which I'm super excited about.
For those of you who don't know, Nikky's on the good side of the world. And would you mind if I read your bio?
Sure.
So I'm going to get most of these words wrong. I'm looking forward to it. Nikky Lee is an award-winning author who grew up as a barefoot 90s kid in Perth, Western Australia. She now lives in New Zealand with her husband and dog, a couch potato cat. In their free time, she writes speculative fiction, often burning the candle at both ends to explore fantastic worlds, mind asteroids, and meet wizards. She's had over 24 stories published in magazines, anthologies, and on the radio. Her short fiction has been shortlisted 6 times in the Aurealis Awards, with her novelette Dingo and Sister winning the Best Young Adult Short Story and the Best Fantasy Novella categories of 2020. 2021, she received a Ditmar Award for the Best New Talent. 2022, her debut novel, Rarkin's Familiar, was a finalist in the Aurealis Awards. Forward Indie Book of the Year Awards, Indies Today Awards, Indie Ink Awards. The list goes on. How do you have room in your room for all of these things?
Well, luckily, none of them, only a couple of them actually come with trophies. They just come with really nice stickers, though. So I just collect stickers.
Easier to collect then. How did you hone your skill? Because we were talking before we went on that, I mean, you work full time. You have responsibilities left, right, and center. You've got your big edit in front of you. You're going to sit down for the whole, 6 or 8 hour core and just go through it. How did you develop your skill this way where you're pulling awards left and right?
It was kind of funny because so while I was obviously, I spent 16 years writing the first manuscript for the Rarkin's Familiar, so that stretched on, and there was other life things happening at the same time. I got married, I traveled, but after I edited that and while it was out on submission, I just sort of started writing short stories. They were like a great little palate cleanser, and so I sort of just started submitting them, and kind of slowly but surely, sort of 10 rejections would roll in and then 1 acceptance. I was like, oh, that's like the little light that keeps you going. And then sort of over 2020, I kind of realized I'd published about 10 or 12 short stories through various places. And wasn't expecting anything. So the Aurealis Awards are Australia's sort of premier sci-fi fantasy awards, so they're judged. And you basically, for short stories, it's free to submit. So I just sort of, half of them got submitted by publishers anyway, but then the ones that didn't, I did myself. And I was standing in a pizza shop while I was on holiday, and I suddenly get ping, 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 ping going on Twitter. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And it turns out Aurealis had announced their shortlist that night. I had no idea it was coming out, and someone had tagged me in it because all these short stories that I'd just been accumulating had got on the shortlist. And I was just standing there, jaw sort of on the ground at the pizza shop, and I swear the waitress there thought something had happened. Like I received some awful news, like my aunt is in the hospital or something like that. No, it's because I was just staring gobsmacked at Twitter.
I just have to ask, I mean, how does that validation feel?
It's definitely like kind of okay, like you're on the right track. is like it's definitely like it's almost like a weight off your shoulders, as you know, okay, like someone out there likes my stuff. Yeah, so it's it kind of gives you a bit of confidence to sort of purposely push things further than you might push it normally, or maybe not second guess as much and just get on with it. So in that sense, it's really it is a confidence boost, but at the same time you're like, oh gosh, but is the stuff that I'm writing now as good as what has been? So yeah, so it's like the imposter syndrome comes, but it just comes at a different angle.
So the imposter syndrome never actually goes
It
away.
finds a way to get to you. It will just circle around and nip you on the ass when you're not expecting it.
That sounds about right. So radio, how did this happen?
It was through there's a Antipodean SF, which is a flash fiction type thing, and so they run, as part of that, they run anyone who gets published through there, which is so it's, I think I don't even know if you earn anything. It might just be like a free publication type thing, but you get to have your story read out as part of a radio show that they run. And so they do offer if you want to read out your own story, which I'm like, no, especially because the one that I had on the radio was set in the UK, and I was like, I can't do an accent to save my life. And so of course naturally they got a Canadian narrator to read it out. But he did a fantastic job, like absolutely blew me away. I was like, way better than anything I could have done. So he absolutely sold it to a T.
So how long was the story that they can, I mean, that sounds majestic, listening to a story on the radio. Was that like
500 words? So it's
okay.
So super short. Like I think you could listen to it in about 2 or 3 minutes. So yeah, it was good fun.
So what was it like growing up as a barefoot 90s kid in Perth?
A lot of heat blisters on your feet. So there was and lots of, like, you learn how to you know how you got white strips down the middle of the road, as you walk on the white strips so you don't burn your feet.
Ooh, that kind of hot.
Yeah.
So were you an adventurous kid that was outside all the time? Were you closeted indoors, coughing into a napkin? Like what kind of kid were you? And I'm talking, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah, like I guess a mix. So like most of my childhood, every school holidays, parents would take us out camping. That was just take the kids and go. So there was lots of, and so the cousins would come along. So there was lots of kids sort of running around, getting into trouble, building like lots and lots of like building cubby houses and shacks in the woods and that sort of thing. So heaps of that. And then as I got slightly older, sort of in school and academia, started to pick up and get a bit more serious. So, but there was still a fair bit of the camping, like snorkeling, surfing, that sort of thing.
Nice.
Yeah. But then that was kind of interspersed throughout schooling.
Well-rounded, athletic, and smart. Very well done. Not most of us can do.
I was just lucky.
So when you're in your formative years, what's the science fiction fantasy stuff that's going into the top of the funnel?
So I 100% blame my parents for this because they're Trekkies. So basically, we didn't really have a TV to about sort of consistently in the house until I was about 10. But the odd times it wasn't, it was kind of this, whoa, what is this? This is the like the cool thing to sort of view and watch. And so I remember watching like Star Trek, Stargate, as I was a bit older, but Star Trek and Superman through the door of my parents' bedroom, trying to see what was going on, because they're supposed to be in bed, but we're watching the phasers going off and the Superman.
So okay, you're kind of looking through the door, peeking through the crack, and seeing.
About it, yeah.
So, like, where did you go from there in terms of, I want to try this, I want to try this?
Like I was very much a daydreamer, so like I would happily spend just like on the car trips if we weren't listening to audiobooks. So that was kind of one of the main ways of getting things into us, is like would be read to as kids, and then audiobooks when we're doing these huge long car trips, because Australia is massive. And so to get even just outside the state of WA, it's like a 10-hour car drive. And so we would take sort of 5-7 hour road trips to go camping, and we'd be listening to audiobooks all through that. So Chronicles of Narnia, The Hobbit, I think we did Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, all those kind of almost all the classics. And so that was kind of just filtering in there. And so when those weren't going on, I would quite happily stare out the window and kind of pull elements, bits and pieces from here and there. And yeah, so like I vaguely remember like spending like mum driving me around when I was about 14, and I would just stare out the window for 30 minutes straight without uttering a word, and she probably thought, what is going on? And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine, I'm just imagining.
Hang on, I'm on act 2.
Slightly weird in that sense.
And so when did it start to bubble over into, oh, I have to make now?
Yeah, so I was fairly arty, so I like to draw, and I like to draw. I was a huge anime fan, so a friend of mine introduced me to that when I was about 12 or 13, and like basically I would watch and read anything I could get my hands on, and so I started drawing the anime characters, and I ended up drawing one, and it was on the floor of my grandmother's house during the summer holidays. Drew a character and went, well, it's a really interesting character, and then started imagining a backstory, as you do, and then eventually it got too big to contain, so I wanted to know what happened in the story, and I couldn't hold everything in my head, so I ended up having to go, I need to get it out, just out any way possible so that I can find out what happens next. And went, okay, well, the only way I'm not good enough to be able to draw a comic strip, so I'll have to write it. And so I wrote it, and then I think within maybe 7 or 8 weeks I had a novel. I was like, oh, whoops. The fastest I've ever written anything.
Wow. And that became this?
No, that was this, which never see the light of day, except I edited for shits and giggles the first chapter of this very early 13-year-old written book, and I basically shred it, pull it apart. So yeah, that was a very, very early, like, first thing I'd ever written. It was never really story inclined before that, so it's pretty bad.
So how did Rockin's Familiar get started? Was this while you were doing short stories?
It started like, so I think I had 2. I was basically, I always wrote for me. I never intended for the world to see it. And so I wrote 2 sort of very high school, full of teenage angst, quite awful manuscripts. And then through uni, I sort of had this, or maybe through end of my high school and through first few years of uni, I had this sort of idea of basically a girl and a monster arguing in a forest. That was kind of the initial thing, and they have to figure out how to get along, because at that point I hadn't figured out what was going to happen to make me do that. And it was very much feel my way through. And then for assignment, I actually had to then submit something, and I was like, okay, this is like my baby. I'm going to put it out, just the first chapter and a bit, to the world, and they really liked it. And so I wasn't expecting them. I was expecting it to get shredded and poo-pooed, because it was fantasy and I was doing English at a university that I was expecting they might want more literary things.
This is beneath us, thank you.
I was fully expecting it to get shredded, and it didn't, and I was quite surprised by that. So yeah, and it that was just enough encouragement to kind of keep it going.
So Rockin's Familiar was a response to what kind of story did you really want it to be? Is it that relationship that's at the core? So like, it's so many things. It's basically everything I loved in all the different fantasies that I read growing up. So like, I think one of the big inspirations was Robin Hobb's Realm of the Oddling. So at that point, I'd only read the first 2 to 3 trilogies. So the Assassins trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, and I think the Tawny Man trilogy was the other one. Oh, okay. And just the world building just completely blew me away. Like, I've never encountered anything that felt so real. And then I closed the book and I'm just like, I cannot believe that is actually just someone's imagination. It's completely fiction. It just felt so vivid, and that was something that I was like, oh, I want more of that. And every now and then I encountered it, but like, that was the pinnacle for me, was the world building there, and just the depth of character. And then like things like
Another one would probably be like the Jonathan Stroud's Bartimaeus trilogy. Like there's a bit of humor in that, there's not a huge amount of humor in this book, but the magic system, that was quite clever and quite interesting. Same with like Sanderson's Arithmetist, which like circles and things like that. So that kind of started to feed in. Naruto, when I was growing up, that kind of found its way in there. And then the Princess Mononoke from Miyazaki was another massive one that just, again, was one of those mind-blowing world building, character relationships, drama, all that action, everything going on. So I sort of say it's more of a pacey book. So I kind of say it's basically a prelude to something someone would read before going on to the likes of Robin Hobb, which is slightly more character driven. That's kind of how I would phrase it.
So what's the emotional hole that you're looking to fill? Like if I feel like this part of me is missing or needs to be filled up, what's that hole that you want to fill emotionally?
I think it's just connection. So the two main characters of the story are coming from very, very different worlds, and slowly they start off and it's a very rocky relationship. It's very combative. And then slowly over time, there's a bit of there's respect and sort of a grudging respect at first, and then it develops into something potentially verging on friendship with, and it was just that kind of cross-cultural, cross-experience sort of understanding and sort of being able to actually go, okay, if you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, that suddenly you can't really criticize. So I think it was from that kind of idea as I wanted people to think about, like maybe the monster isn't the monster you think it is, that they might actually be the victim. So yeah.
And just out of curiosity, how did you come up with how the bond works between them? That's a tough question, but it came out of necessity, right? It was like, I know I want this. I need to form this bridge.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of it that was probably inspired initially by probably the wit in Robin Hobb's Fast Year trilogy. So the wit, for anyone who hasn't read the trilogy, is essentially like an animal-person bond, and they can feel each other, speak to each other. It's all telepathic, empathic type thing. And I think that was something like, obviously I love that element, and I decided that, okay, I'm going to take that. And then I kind of went, oh, how do I make it different, or different enough that it's got its own sort of spin on it? So I decided, okay, we'll make it a blood pact. And what happens if it's not necessarily a good thing? So a lot of the fantasy that I've read is like, oh, this is kind of a cool thing that to have. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's cool, but it might also turn you insane. So.
Just a little bit of this, a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, and it's also, you've got this monster that's not particularly happy with the whole situation either.
So one of the things that I kind of think about when I'm selecting which books to read is, if you like Y, then you'll like me, or you'll like this book, or you'll like this author. Is Hobb your Y, or are there other authors that kind of fit into that?
Definitely other authors. I'd say this is more like a YA version of Hobb. It's definitely not quite as in-depth, certainly not as long, though the second book's looking like it might be, but maybe not after some heavy editing. But definitely anything like Tamora Pierce, it's like an adult version of that. So it's kind of sitting in this, like it's been marketed as a YA, but I'd say it's probably more like a new adult thing, definitely upper YA. Anything to like, so Naruto for a start, you might enjoy. Yeah, so what do I have? I've got, Miyazaki as well, like the Princess Mononoke. Probably notice a few things in there that I've kind of taken inspiration from.
Well, and it's a great list. I mean, that's inspirational.
Yeah,
so
and then,
like for the people that have already, and I've got 1 minute, sorry, but for the people that have already read your books and their response to it, like, is there a consistent theme about what you hear being said over and over again about your work that either you expected or didn't?
I guess, like the vivid world building often comes up, which I'm like, yes, because that was definitely I'm a world building. I love world building, and so I just have to make sure I don't go overboard. And then the other one is the relationship between the two main characters, is that slow understanding and the progression that goes through. So I guess those are the two things that tend to crop up a lot. And both of those are things that I really wanted to do well and get right as something can be, because it's nothing is ever truly finished.
And you're hard at work right now on the sequel.
Yeah. So it is coming, I promise.
By the end of today, it'll be just one step further along. You're really, really close, aren't you?
Very close, and like I can smell it now. It's like the light is there at the end of the tunnel.
Well, if this sounds like something that would be interesting to you and fits the right type of thing that you're looking for, please go out and pick up the book right now, because there's a second one coming on its way. Toot sweet. So thank you very, very much, Nikky. I appreciate you.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. And Bachelor number 3, Michael Michel. I believe your microphone is muted, sir.
Oh man, I do coaching calls all day, every day, and of course I'm the one who mutes theirs. It doesn't make any sense.
It's like part of your standard job, and it's like, how many times have I had to tell somebody to take it? Oh, it's me.
It's me. It's always me.
I had one of those calls today. Would you mind if I read your bio?
You know, after hearing Tori and Nikky's, which by the way, I'm so impressed by them, and I feel like after hearing them, I'm like, wow, I have so much to learn, and they're like so impressive. I'm just honestly honored to be here. And my bio seems so bland after hearing their incredible bios. I mean, I could sum it up for you if you want. Live with my
I think we
my
need
partner.
to do the whole. You're busy being bashful. I think we need to do the whole presentation.
All right, go for it.
Michael Michel lives in Bend, Oregon with the love of his life and their 2 children when he isn't obsessively writing, editing, or doing publishing work. He can be found coaching leaders in the corporate world, exercising and dancing his butt off at festivals like Burning Man. You want to tell me that's boring? His favorite TV shows are Dark, The Wire, Arcane, and Arrested Development. He loves nature and deep conversations with anyone, really. And a few things bring him more joy than a couple of hours playing table tennis. Are you really good at ping pong?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's no question about it.
I have lots of people who be like, hey, I'm good at ping pong. Let's play. And I'm like, where's your paddle? Where's your paddle case? You don't got to, you're just going to use one of those old rickety? I don't even like to play them, really. I'm so snobby about it.
So are you like one of these guys that slings it into the table and sends the ball 15 feet back and you got to run over to the other side of the room and get it?
Oh, yeah. I've got I stand this, and you got your forehand, and then you got your backhand, right? I get this whole serve, I throw it up and chop it really quick. It's embarrassing, but I can't do it any other way.
So is this a product of a misspent youth or a really intelligent adulthood? I don't know.
The best spent youth is what I would say. I have 2 older brothers, and our parents, best move they've ever made. This is a great parenting move if you got multiple kids. Buy them a ping pong table. Me and my brothers just spent I was 10 years old. We would just hours and hours. All our friends wanted to play all the time. Our neighbor was like an Air Force base champion. It was incredible. That was so fun. I couldn't beat him for 10 years though. He was so good.
Okay, really genuinely fundamental question. Did you beat your older brothers?
Oh yeah, I crush them now. They kind of stopped, and I'm kind of I got a coach at one point for a short period and was doing tournaments and stuff. Not big tournaments and not winning them, but I was doing it.
Competitive tournament style ping pong. I'm not allowed to say ping pong. I have to say table tennis, right?
Table tennis. You gotcha. That's exactly right.
Okay.
I had a rating and everything.
Out of curiosity, why am I not allowed to say ping pong?
I mean, you're allowed. It's just,
but it's
I was
quickly correct.
Yeah, I was quickly corrected. I started going to this huge club. Everybody there was 20 years older than me at the youngest. And I said, "Oh, I love ping pong." And they're like, "It's table tennis." And I'm like, "Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Do."
I will never say it wrong again. I'm sorry, and I will correct everyone else who does.
Yeah. It's our way of knowing who's on the in and who's on the outs,
So you got 2 older brothers and then you. Is there anybody else on the sibling chain?
Nope.
Youngest. So are you classic youngest kid?
Okay, so are you talking Adlerian family systems classic youngest kid? Because if so, probably. Like the youngest is the one who puts others in their service. They're good at like, getting people to go along with their thing. I actually think I have a theory about it. So the oldest conforms, they're the hero child, they conform to parental norms, right? Middle child rebels because they see the attention that the oldest is getting for doing the right things or the things their parents want. So the middle child, the rebel child, does the opposite to get the attention. The youngest, well, both those two first niches are filled. So they've got to come up with some other clever ways to get attention. Mine was being funny. So I would just get all the attention from being funny at family dinner and being silly goofball all the time. So that was my jam. And when you're funny, people tend to want to do what you want them to, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more fun to hang out than the boring people.
Yeah.
So when you're a kid, are you like trailing around after your older brothers? Are you like, no, I'm over here and I've got my own universe going on? Where did the reading and kind of look at the pretty things start to happen?
Honestly, so if you've looked in the front pages of The Price of Power, my dedication is to my two older brothers. And honestly, getting a little emotional here. So grateful, so lucky to have my two older brothers. I did not expect to get emotional on this. Look at you. Am I your first crier? Probably. That's all right. I'm totally cool with crying in public. I actually have a fantasy of crying on national television someday, just to show people it's totally okay.
So what are your older brothers' names? Because now I got to dig in.
Oh, Ryan and Eric. And
Ryan is the number one.
Yep.
And Eric was behind. So what is it about
the number one? It's the first.
Number one plot. So what is it about your brothers that encouraged and inspired you? What does this connection happen?
Well, okay, so my oldest brother is the nicest guy. He was so nice. Me and my brothers, we never fought, really. I mean, we'd argue and shit, but we never fought. We played together. We're all about 2 years apart. So their middle one's 2 years older than me. Oldest one's 2 years older than him. And my middle brother, I mean, he was a little bit ragey here and there, and he honestly still is. But he's super supportive. By far, he's got to be one of the most supportive people in my life. Anything I've ever done, he's like, hey, my brother's doing this thing, So we played together. We read a lot of the same books, it'd be a summer day out of school. Ryan's out reading outside, laying in the sun. I'm up in my room reading, book in the same series. Eric's over there doing whatever. We'd play table tennis together. Me and Eric played Warhammer. We all played Magic cards together.
Oh, yeah.
It was awesome. We'd watch same shows and movies. It was great.
So you've got this really positive, encouraging environment going along with them and that kind of environment. And what is it? Do you read that story that says, oh, I can do better? Or do you read that story, you're like, oh my gosh, if only I could write something like that? Where did the writing start?
Oh, that's a great question. So it kind of happens in layers, I would say. And the first one was I'm obviously just enjoying the hell out of my life, hearing all these stories. My dad, putting on an audiobook of David Eddings on a car trip with the family and stuff.
Thank you, Dad.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. Just all that stuff. So really positive experience with all these nerdy, geeky things. And yet, a side story, I had a lot of shame about being seen as a nerd. We'll get into that later. But I, in 7th grade, was mowing my mom's friend's lawn, getting that $20 that you needed. Yeah. And I just started making up a story, and I was like, I want to write a book. And so from there on, it was just writing down cities and worlds and cultures and really diving in, really rich world building. I made a map in 7th grade, which is honestly still the same map I probably will use today, but a lot of the other stuff changed. And then I read Game of Thrones when I was 19.
Okay.
So almost 20 years ago. And I was like, oh man, I've always liked writing, and I've always wanted to write this book since 7th grade, but that was take writing classes. So I just started taking a bunch of writing classes in college. I ended up joining a table called the Wordos Critique Group. And the Wordos are of Eugene, Oregon. they're incredible. They've got like Nina Kiriki Hoffman's won a World Fantasy Award. I've written with her, critiqued and been critiqued by her. There's Nebula Award winners. There's like 14 Riders of the Future winners. So I did that for like 3 years straight, and it was that polished me up real good, to say the least.
Is there something in the air in the Pacific Northwest that generates these amazing fantasy?
You heard of rain? It keeps you indoors and clicking away on your little keyboard.
I can't go anywhere. Otherwise, I got to go play table tennis.
Yeah. Well, you go somewhere, just not physically.
So is once that started, where did you start pulling your inspiration from? Did you have like 2 books that were like the big influences, or was it this panoply that fed into it?
Oh, it was more panoply. I even at one point started reading like the top 100 like greatest sci-fi books of all time, like just going down the list. I probably got a solid like 30 books out of the top 50 through that experience. And then, starting to edge in toward grimdark. Like I'm drawn to the kind of shows that are on TV for 1 or 2 seasons and then they get canceled because they're almost too complex. The good ones, they're almost too complex, and the general public doesn't quite gravitate toward it. And I
like more mashed potato stuff. You don't have to think, just don't even have to chew.
Exactly. It's like just spoon-fed Gary Stu and Mary Sue. I honestly hate that. I hate a Firefly. Exactly, Andrew. I like to keep me engaged. I need complexity. I need constant change. And I just love, you see it in like TV shows like Game of Thrones. It's like even the haircuts change from season to season because they're giving a character, it's like, this is the season where they blank. Whereas in a lot of fantasy, it's a repetitive, this is kind of how the character is, and they may grow some, but to expect the same things from them over and over. They've got their like D&D sheet where it's like, they do this when this happens. They do this when this happens. And that's it. Right. Whereas grimdark is character driven to the point of like, they could go anywhere and you may not like it. And that's kind of how life is. It just doesn't repeat in the way that you want all the time. Right. That doesn't mean that there can't be, I would say Price of Power is like grimdark with a ray of hope. I'd put it like a 5 out of 10 on the grimdark scale. This guy's the grimdarkest of them all. That's Barrowdane, Prince Barrowdane, the Mad Prince. But anyways, yeah, I can't remember the question at all. I do know I've been talking for a while, though.
That's the best kind of answer.
Okay, good.
So, like, you're new to this game and you're starting out and you've got the book out and you're working, right?
Oh, you mean like a job?
Well, no. I mean, you're working on more for us, right?
Oh, yeah. I've got like 150,000 words of book 2 is done. I just completed today a 16,000 word novelette, which I'm going to make free for everybody, called War Song. It's going to be illustrated. The cover will be done by the amazing Thomas Duchek. And I've got another book in a separate series that's already done. That one's a secret project. And I'm
not anymore
about that one. I haven't said maybe I should. I'm not going to say the title yet. But that one's done. Essentially, it just needs to be proofread. And but I'm waiting until I get the second Price of Power book out to do and War Song out. I also have a short story collection I'm going to release too.
So this is the perfect time to ask you this question then. So if you could go back and say a piece of advice to your earlier writing self after having gone through finishing and publishing one, finishing and not publishing another, on your way to finishing a third, what advice would you give yourself?
This is a slightly spiritual answer, but honestly, nothing, because I truly believe that everything that happens in life, whether it's unpleasant or pleasant, happens for a reason. It's meant to be. I look back at all my romantic relationships that failed. And when I really think about it, whether at the time I might have been really upset and like, I didn't want this to happen. But then I think about it and I go, I actually did kind of want that to happen. It really released me to be able to discover the next thing that's better for me, which I'm engaged currently. So obviously
very well.
Out. Yeah, exactly.
So are you a person that believes that the challenges in life are there for a reason to make you a better person?
Absolutely. The universe will give you the lesson you need in order to evolve. And that's what I constantly align to. And great thing about that alignment and principle is it allows you to just keep going and keep writing more books and having self-trust and giving yourself permission to be like, wow, this chapter really sucks. And finish it. You're going to have to come back and rewrite it anyway. You know that. That's okay. So let it suck.
Yeah,
just
it
get
can
the words
suck.
down.
It'll still be there tomorrow.
Exactly.
So what would you say are the big, if you had to name 2 or 3 authors that if you like these authors, Price of Power is something that you would want to check out?
Okay. Oh, that one's easy. My reviewers have pretty much already done it for me.
Okay.
I think I have like 40 ratings or 30 reviews on Goodreads currently, and half of them are like Joe Abercrombie and Game of Thrones, which I'm like, yes, I didn't know who Joe Abercrombie was when I finished this book.
Oh, nice.
And after some beta readers were like, this reminds me of that. I was like, okay. And I went and read it and I was like, oh, I really like this. I get it. It's just
this
like
is an apt comparison.
An apt comparison. It's the focus on voice, I think, is like the big piece. But for me, it's a lesser known, but I honestly think the thing that's come the closest that I've read that reminds me of it is The Steel Remains by Richard K. Morgan.
I read that one.
It even has the same number of POVs. There's just a very similar, like, even the mistakes in the writing remind me of the mistakes I make at times. But yeah, okay. That one really reminded me.
I need to do a pause timeout real quick. If you like that book, please stop this and go to Amazon right now and buy The Price of Power, because there's your comparison. There's your market right there. So please stop, go get it. We'll be here when you come back.
Open tab. You can do it while you watch. It's going to be great.
Yeah. So is there one piece of the book, like this is a little bit of a passion project, this builds and feels good. When you got done, was there one piece or one chapter or one section of the book that really resonated with you? It was like, yeah, that's the emotion that I wanted to get there.
Oh, what a great question. There's 2. One's pretty spoilery, and I can't say anything, but it's also the scene where it's about 2/3 of the way through the book. And it's usually when people are like, first 2/3, a little bit of a slow burn, although not everybody says that. Some people say it's well paced, but like they hit that scene and it's like, it was just explosive from there, like just took off. And it does encapsulate what I want people to experience for sure. And then there's another one that's more like the tone of the books. And that's one I just put a live reading out, a series of 4 live reading 1-minute clips or less, or 5 on my Instagram. So if you want to listen to a short section of the book that encapsulates kind of the tone of the book, it's probably the most grim, dark portion of the book as well. Mm-hmm. But I think it's honestly the most well-written piece. Then go check that out. I really love it.
And so you've got this kind of fuse that you wanted to happen during Act 1 and Act 2, and we get to 3 and you just blow the doors off.
Yeah, well, it's funny when people say it's a slow burn. I'm like, sure, I get that. I don't feel like anything is not happening action-wise. Like I get too bored. If I'm bored, I cut, right? Mm-hmm. I cut boring stuff. So if there's not like necessary character development or world building or something new, I try to have something new occurring, a new person, a new whatever, as we go. Then, I still find that exciting. But some people said it was a slow burn. It's also the first book of 5 in a series of 1 million words. I mean, like if only a half is like slow, whatever, that's pretty normal. So I'm totally cool with that parallel that people are drawing.
Well, and the real thing is, I feel like it's evenly paced. I feel like it's a slow burn. What matters is getting to that point of the story where things really begin to catch on fire, and then you feel like you've earned every bit of it. It's like, okay, yes, let's go.
Yeah.
So
And that's what people usually say. So
we covered other authors, but like when you start getting reviews back, you start finding out things that are true because they get repeated over and over again. Is there anything that you weren't expecting that you heard out of the reviews that you're like, oh wow, okay, or I'm glad they got that?
honestly, the biggest question mark, I mean, I think I can only speak from my experience, I guess, but I believe that most authors go, am I really good at writing? Am I really a good writer? That's the one that stressed me out the most, And like even the 3 reviews of 3-star that I've seen, they're like, the prose is great. I never didn't want to read. Like the writing is really good. Like every single review says something about the prose. And I'm like sitting here going, really? Because when I read it, I just want to cut myself a little bit because I hate it so much, not always. And that's very dramatic, but I get pretty frustrated, I just had somebody yesterday on Instagram say like, I can't believe this is your first book. Honestly, I don't think that, you're getting compared to Game of Thrones and Joe Abercrombie. I think someday that people are going to get compared to you. And I was like, that is the best thing I've ever heard. So reposted that for sure. But like, yeah, I'm that stunned me, honestly, was the writing piece.
Well, and if you like Game of Thrones and you like Joe Abercrombie and you wish you could have been part of the phenomenon before it began, The Price of Power is what you want to go and get right this very second. Be on the ground floor. Oh, Michael, I really appreciate you. Thank you very much. And actually, since she's still here, Nikki, I just wanted to go ahead and bring you on. I know your mic's on mute, but I just wanted to remind everybody of what you've seen here tonight through Tori, through Nikki, through Michael. And here's the thing. Independent authors need your support. And what I'm asking you to do right now is to say, you know what? One of these 3 books, maybe 2 of these 3, maybe all 3 of them move me in some way. And say, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. And I want you to head on over to Amazon right now and select the one that you want and buy it tonight. Because being exposed to new readers, you being exposed to new stories and taking a risk is why we're all here. So I just want to say thank you all so much, and we'll see you in a little bit. Bye.